On a storm-ravaged night, James hastily abandons a farmhouse and plunges into the dense forest, closely pursued by a woman. Amidst the chaos, she is shot. Simultaneously, Vincent and his son Simon carry out a cruel act by dousing the woman with gasoline. With an impassive face, Vincent lights a cigarette and throws it on her, consuming her in flames. Immediately afterward, both continue the hunt for James. In the distance, a masked man watches the scene without intervening. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Carter, while patrolling the region, finds James seriously injured, crawling along the road. Although he initially suspects that he is drunk, he quickly realizes the gravity of the situation and rushes him to a nearby hospital. In a hospital still recovering from a recent fire and operating with limited staff, Allison Fraser is working, estranged from her husband, Daniel. Allison, along with her colleague Beverly and others like Kim, an intern, are struggling to keep the hospital operational. While Allison talks in the waiting room with Ben and his pregnant granddaughter Maggie about the recent troubling events in the city, they are interrupted by the commotion caused by James in his room, which ceases when Dr. Richard Powell calms him with a sedative. Upon examining James, Allison recognizes him from his documentation and observes several needle marks on his arms. Later, while Daniel is talking with colleagues, Dr. Powell approaches to inform him that it will take several hours before James is able to explain what happened. The doctor also expresses his sympathy to Daniel for the recent loss of his son and suggests that he take the necessary time to process his grief. Walking down the hallway, Daniel witnessed an unspeakable horror in Cliff's room. Beverly, her face hideously deformed, was stabbing Cliff in the eye. Immediately afterward, she began to inflict cuts on herself. Daniel tried to stop her without success, and faced with the threatening advance of Beverly armed with scissors, he was forced to shoot her, resulting in her death. The sound of the gunshot attracted the medical team, who arrived at the scene completely horrified. Deeply disturbed, Daniel sought refuge in the bathroom, where he collapsed, haunted by disturbing visions. Upon rejoining the staff, he was assisted by Dr. Powell and Allison. Amidst the turmoil, State Deputy Mitchell informed him about a violent incident at the farmhouse and indicated that James was the prime suspect, suggesting that he may have drugged Beverly. Questioning Daniel's decision to use his weapon, Mitchell proceeded to confiscate it. With the phone lines down, Daniel tried unsuccessfully to use his car phone to report Beverly's death. At that moment, he came across a cult member dressed in a white robe and with a black triangle on his face. Upon confronting him, the lights suddenly went out. Surrounded by more cult members, Daniel was forced to return to the hospital for refuge, where the medical team worked hard to stabilize him and prevent him from bleeding out. In an even more sinister turn, Beverly's lifeless body began to move abnormally, and a horrifying creature emerged from her mouth. Regaining consciousness, Daniel looks up to find himself confronted by a group of menacing figures armed with knives. Trapped and unable to call for help, the hospital staff sense the group's evil intentions. Suddenly, a harrowing scream breaks the silence, coming from a nearby room. There, they find James in a desperate struggle for his life, handcuffed to a bed and trying to get away from Beverly, who is now transformed into a tentacled creature. Paralyzed by the terror of what he sees, Mitchell remains immobile. While Daniel acts quickly to try and rescue James, they shoot at the mutated Beverly, who incredibly withstands the impacts. Finally, they decide to retreat and close the door behind them. Armed with an axe, Daniel quickly takes the lead to devise an escape plan. The situation escalates when Vincent and Simon enter the lobby, armed and demanding that James be handed over. Although he is being devoured by the creature that used to be Beverly, James resists and, in a desperate act, threatens to harm Maggie. The doctor tries to calm James, but in a tragic turn of events, he is fatally stabbed in the neck. At that critical moment, the lurking creature approaches Mitchell and, with a swift movement of its tentacles, tears out his eyes in a ruthless act before finally being shot down by Vincent and Simon, who manage to eliminate it. Daniel urges them to take refuge in the office while he coordinates the situation. Terrified by the horror they have witnessed and with Simon now suffering damage to his vocal cords, Vincent and Simon hesitate about what to do next. Vincent tries to attack Daniel, but Simon intervenes, suggesting they work together to find a way out of the hospital, fearing the creature might regenerate. Worried about the possibility of Mitchell transforming into a monster, they opt to incinerate his body and move it outside to prevent any possible reanimation. On their way to the office, the group runs into Maggie, who is about to become a mother. Tension intensifies with every step, exacerbated by Vincent's hostility, which puts everyone on edge. Allison informs Daniel of the urgent need to get medical supplies from the basement to assist in the birth, a risky but necessary task. With some reluctance, Daniel agrees to lead the expedition, though he stresses the importance of careful preparation before venturing out. Daniel, along with Vincent and Simon, devises a strategy to retrieve the shotgun he left in his patrol car. Upon arrival, they discover that the vehicle is further away than they had calculated, and the cult seems to have disappeared from the area. Meanwhile, they take Maggie to an adjoining room where labor begins. Given the delay in preparations and the increasing urgency, Allison chooses to go to the basement alone in search of the necessary supplies. At that very moment, Dr. Powell, who was believed to be dead, appears out of nowhere, right behind Allison. Almost simultaneously, Daniel activates the strobe lights on his car, bathing the area in light and revealing several cult members hidden in the shadows of the forest. One of them surprises Simon, but Daniel acts quickly, managing to save him at the last moment. Together, they rush back to the hospital. Realizing that Allison was left alone, Daniel's irritation intensifies, and without wasting a second, he runs to the basement to help her. As they move down the hallway, with a mixture of surprise and alarm, they notice that Dr. Powell's body, which previously lay covered on the floor, has mysteriously disappeared. As Allison rummaged through the basement searching for what she needed, the shrill sound of a telephone broke the sepulchral silence. On the other end of the line, Dr. Powell's calm voice clarified the enigmas surrounding the recent events. He revealed his connection to the enigmatic tentacled entities and the corpses found in a vault. At the same time, Vincent discovered compromising photographs linking the doctor to a sinister cult. Daniel, acting with urgency, dedicated himself to gathering medical supplies while entrusting the still inexperienced and nervous Kim with the task of caring for Maggie. The tension intensified, and Kim, overwhelmed by the situation, began to feel panic taking over. Despite the adversity, they had no alternative. Kim, Ben, and Maggie had to face the terror of feeling abandoned. At the same time, Daniel, Vincent, and Simon decided to interrogate James, who appeared in the compromising photographs. Under the threat of coercive interrogation, James confessed that Dr. Powell led a group responsible for committing atrocities and that he possessed the ability to manipulate people. Under pressure, he agreed to guide them back to the basement, but his terror increased when he observed that the building was surrounded by cult followers. In an effort to contribute, Kim used a radio to give directions to the group, guiding them towards the room they needed to locate. However, the radio communication began to fail at a critical moment, just as the group discovered that they had descended some unknown stairs that were leading them to an uncertain and potentially dangerous destination. Allison, slowly returning to reality on a surgical table, found Dr. Powell beside her, who revealed that he had discovered a way to elude death, driven by the painful memory of his daughter Sarah. Confused and weakened by the effects of the drugs administered, Allison pleaded for her life, though the doctor warned her that it was too late to turn back. On the other hand, Kim faced difficulties in taking care of Maggie. Communication with the rest of the team had been completely cut off. She was forced to administer a painkiller to the young pregnant woman, both isolated in the basement. Meanwhile, Daniel, Simon, Vincent, and James reached a room marked with a triangular symbol. Although Vincent was opposed, Daniel was determined to unveil the mystery that the door concealed. In the operating room, Dr. Powell detailed his plan to resurrect his daughter using Allison. Observing something growing at an alarming rate inside her, he stated that Allison would become an extraordinary entity. Allison's abdomen began to shake violently. Meanwhile, in the depths of the basement, the group gained access to a secret chamber filled with deformed beings and corpses reanimated by a diabolical energy. These mutilated figures, with a monstrous appearance and superhuman strength, attacked mercilessly. Fighting for their lives, the four sought refuge wherever they could. In an unexpected turn of events, James turned against Daniel. Defying the odds, the officer manages to repel the attack, but just then, a monstrous creature drags him up to the heights. With the progress of her pregnancy, Maggie weakens visibly. Her skin acquires a ghostly pallor, an ominous sign that she may not survive until delivery. Kim, paralyzed by fear, hesitates whether to perform an emergency cesarean section, but Ben, with determination, urges her to find the courage to save his future granddaughter. Unexpectedly, Maggie stands up and, in a terrifying act, slits her grandfather's throat, declaring that she carries Dr. Powell's child in her womb. As the delivery approaches, an unknown energy invades her, transforming her agony into a renewed strength. Kim, horrified, watches her become eerily calm as Maggie assures her that everything will be fine, evidencing a drastic and sinister change in her attitude, as if she were under a possession. Moments later, Kim perceives how the cult followers break into the building and, in a desperate maneuver to escape, finds herself trapped near the exit. She takes refuge in a room, closing the door behind her. In the depths of the basement, Vincent and Simon are victims of hallucinations that transport them to their old home. There, Vincent accuses Simon of the family tragedy and attacks him. Simon, in defense, fires a flare into Vincent's chest, dispelling the illusion. Upon regaining mental clarity, Vincent repents and reconciles with his son, accepting together whatever fate has in store for them. Meanwhile, Kim, hiding in the ventilation ducts, tries unsuccessfully to contact Daniel by radio. She holds her breath to avoid screaming when a cult member prowls the dark hallway. On the other hand, Daniel meets Allison in the operating room. Both are moved by the memory of the child they lost, while the sinister voice of Dr. Powell torments them, reminding Daniel of the strange relief he felt at losing his son. Without warning, Allison metamorphoses into a creature full of tentacles and sticky appendages that sprout from her body. Determined to prevent her from becoming an abomination, Daniel lunges ferociously at his wife's mutant form, wielding an axe and armed with desperate courage. Surprisingly, Daniel finds himself in a morgue illuminated by an immense glowing triangle, where Dr. Powell boasts of having defied God by mastering both life and death. He offers Daniel the chance to reunite with his son in exchange for his own existence. From the shadows, Maggie appears and stabs Daniel before turning towards Dr. Powell, whose figure is revealed to be flayed. With an almost religious fervor, Maggie kneels before him while chanting in front of the triangle that opens before them. Dr. Powell, upon touching Maggie's head, induces visions of the creature she carries inside, plunging her into absolute terror. A chilling scream announces that her abdomen is ripping open, allowing the birth of a gigantic and grotesque creature that the doctor calls Sarah Reborn. From a distance, Simon and Vincent shoot at the beast that advances relentlessly, preparing for a bloody battle. The creature captures Vincent, and, in a desperate attempt to rescue him, Simon watches as his father soaks them with isopropyl alcohol and begs him to set them on fire. With a hesitation laden with sadness, Simon feels unable to harm his own father. However, seeing the image of his wife and baby behind him, Vincent urges him to act. At the crucial moment, as the creature mutilates Vincent, Simon, with tears in his eyes, throws the flare and witnesses the tragic destruction of his father. Sliding silently, Simon approaches the air duct, dodging the threat that lurks. Meanwhile, Dr. Powell informs Daniel that he can reunite with Allison if he stops resisting and starts using his astral powers. Daniel, refusing to give in, attacks the doctor, causing both of them to fall together into a bottomless abyss. At the same time, the corridors of the building vibrate and creak just as Simon, in a critical moment, avoids being captured by a horrendous creature while the walls seem to close in on him. With a desperate leap, he manages to free himself at the last moment. Turning around, he observes that the hospital has recovered its normal appearance and has returned to the real world. With the first light of dawn, he meets Kim. The cult members have disappeared, as if they had never been there. Dr. Powell and his followers have been consumed by the void. Meanwhile, on another plane, Daniel and Allison, hand in hand, emerge in a parallel universe under an imposing black pyramid. Reincarnated in this dark dimension, they exist as immutable souls, trapped in an eternal limbo, not knowing if this is the end of their odyssey or the beginning of a new path.